What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and you're watching our Big Ten channel. We're going to preview the Wisconsin Badgers schedule for 2024. Before we get to that schedule, let's look back at 2023. Here was the schedule from last season for Wisconsin. Of course, played Washington State in the non-conference. Also played Buffalo and Georgia Southern. And then you look at their games against the Big Ten East. They played Ohio State. It's kind of crazy that they lost to Indiana. They played Rutgers, Ohio State, Indiana. Yeah, no surprise they lost to Ohio State, but a pretty big surprise that they lost to Indiana, as bad as they were last season. So it seemed like an easy cross-division schedule, but again, they did trip up against the Hoosiers. Really, it was a disappointing season for Wisconsin last year, given this schedule. But we look to the 2024 schedule, and here it is. Before we go week by week, let's break it down. First, we'll look at the non-conference. Western Michigan, South Dakota, and Alabama. So they've got a big non-conference game this year, of course, against the Crimson Tide. That's going to be a fun matchup. Wisconsin, year 2 under Luke Fickell. Kalen DeBoer making his debut there at Alabama this season. Where will that program be exactly? Where will both programs be? That's going to be a fun matchup. A home game for Wisconsin. I think they've got a shot. You look at the rest of their home schedule, those 3 non-conference games, and they play Purdue, Penn State, Oregon, and Minnesota. So they'll get 4 conference games at home, 5 conference games on the road. But overall, they will play 7 home games. So Purdue, Penn State, Oregon, and Minnesota there in the Big Ten. Penn State, Oregon, definitely going to be tough games, but you like their chances at home against Purdue and Minnesota. Now let's look at the road schedule now. We got at USC, at Rutgers, at Northwestern, at Iowa, and at Nebraska. So not too tough of a road schedule here, really. USC, that's going to be a tough one, I'm sure. Iowa will always be tough. Nebraska could be tough. Rutgers, they're all games that Wisconsin could lose, but I think they've got a shot in all 5 of these games. So it's not a terrible away schedule. They don't play Ohio State. They don't play Michigan. So, it works out pretty well for them in the Big Ten. Let's go week by week. They'll start with Western Michigan on August 31st. Then it's South Dakota the next week, September 7th. Then they'll play Alabama on September 14th. So the 3 non-conference games will be the first 3 games of the season. And then they get a bye week. So it's almost like you get a break before the real season starts, before the Big Ten conference schedule begins. And it will begin with a road game at USC. They will not get the bye week after traveling out west. Instead, they'll get it the week before. We've seen that with some teams where they go out west, travel across the country, which Wisconsin's really not quite across the country. Traveling to California there, they'll get a bye week before that game. Then they'll play Purdue on October the 5th. Then it's on the road at Rutgers on the 12th and on the road at Northwestern on the 19th. So back-to-back road games. Not necessarily the toughest places to play, but still, they will have to travel 2 weeks in a row there with Rutgers and Northwestern. They'll get Penn State at home on October 26th, and then Iowa at home on the 2nd. That's going to be a tough back-to-back there. Really a tough stretch when you talk about 2 road games, back-to-back road games, then Penn State, then Iowa. Pretty tough stretch there. Luckily, they get a bye week after that Iowa game and a bye week before playing Oregon. So they get a bye week before both of their former Pac-12 opponents, before USC, before Oregon. That's interesting. But they'll play Oregon on the 16th, and they'll go on the road to play Nebraska on November 23rd. And they close things out with Minnesota on the 30th. So again, the toughest stretch, I think, is going to be back-to-back road games, then Penn State, then Iowa. Those 4 games in a row there could be pretty tough. But you could even go all the way from USC to Iowa there. That's going to be a pretty good grind there in those games. And then to close things out with Oregon, Nebraska, Minnesota. This is a pretty tough schedule for Wisconsin. But it's again, one of those schedules where, they can win most games here on the schedule. I would say the only games they're going to be a pretty big underdog are Alabama, Penn State, and Oregon. But they could lose a lot of games. They could lose to Rutgers or Northwestern on the road. They could lose to USC on the road. They could lose to Nebraska on the road, even Minnesota. So it's definitely going to be a challenging schedule for Wisconsin in 2024.